Hello, listeners, and welcome to another episode of Subscription Scaled. I'm your host, Nick Frederick. With me today is Brian Comiskey, who is the Director of Thematic Programs at the Consumer Technology Association. Brian, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Nick. Happy to join.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks for taking the time to do it. Maybe let's start with what are thematic programs for those that have never heard of it. It's not a title you run across every day.
No, it's not. To be honest, it's kind of one I helped kind of create myself. But basically, what it's referring to is when you unpack technology and trends shaping certain sectors. Another way to think about trends is storytelling themes. And in this case, programs associated with it. And in my role day to day, primarily, I actually work in a partnership with NASDAQ. So for about 13 years, CTA has partnered on thematic stock indexes. So if you've seen a thematic ETF or exchange traded fund that tracks cybersecurity, they follow indexes. And NASDAQ works heavily on the quantitative side, while CTA and my team works on the qualitative, saying this company fits in this theme. And how do you basket them together to create an investable index? That's one program.
Yeah.
Then the other one is, CTA is the owner and producer of CES, the largest technology trade show in the world. Part of my job and my teams is to look at, well, CES is a thematic program. What are the themes that are shaping within it? It's this big tent show that features gaming, digital health. It's one of the largest auto shows in the world. All these things together, and I undersold how many tech trends are there, but how do you unpack all of that and start to rearrange them into neat themes that really can give insights to enterprises and consumers alike on where we're going in the future? So in a long-winded sense, I would say I'm a futurist. My job is to figure out what the trends are in the next few months and what that means in a year from now.
Okay. Well, so many questions there, and definitely want to dive into that. And we can, I definitely want to go into the show itself. I think I went there, I want to say at this point, probably 20 years ago, I went to CES, and then I think it was like the biggest show in the world. So I can't imagine what it's even like today. And we can definitely go there. But before we do, tell us a little bit more about your background and how you ended up at CTA.
Yeah, of course. So my actual background's in international relations. In terms of that, it was very humanities, but also data driven. Then from there, I drove into media analytics, working with Fortune 500 companies, communications and marketing suites. How do you effectively use data to measure the success and impact of your messaging key points? So that's where I started to get kind of the data background and the understanding of data-driven decisions alongside messaging. Then I worked as a consultant for the U.S. Coast Guard in digital transformation. That was more the tech side of cybersecurity policy, cloud implementation. How do you incorporate subscription services of cloud, cybersecurity, AI solutions to help stand up a new cybersecurity division at the Coast Guard? And then I ended up at CTA, where I've get to wear a lot of hats in the role supporting NASDAQ, supporting our comms team, get to do some industry forecasts around where the sector is going in terms of certain tech categories. I sit in a team of about 13 folks in research. We all have to work with one another on all of our projects. So I do things like industry forecasting, where it's what does the video streaming market forecast to look like in the next 5 years? What is audio streaming? I usually handle entertainment subscription services, but we do forecast digital health subscription services, smart home, all the just hundreds of categories of what the next 5 years look like from a revenue standpoint.
Okay.
So a lot of data and mixing it with, well, how do you unpack it and message it to our members as a trade association?
Yeah. Gosh, there's so many different routes we could go there. There's probably a podcast episode in every one of those verticals you just talked about in terms of like trends and kind of what's coming that a lot of listeners would want to know. But maybe for the sake of argument, let's pick one and kind of go down that path. What is an interesting vertical that you think has great applicability to subscription or recurring type services? And what are you kind of seeing there?
Yeah, of course. Well, and I think, we start with one, but, as you and I kind of chatted a little bit earlier, I think there's convergence is really where the space is headed, where all these services will eventually get there. And so kind of teasing the listeners a little bit, the word bundling will come up, I'm sure. But I guess let's start with the area that I spend a lot of time forecasting, and I think is out of personal interest. This is out of work, is I look at kind of where the entertainment subscription services, because that's in a lot of ways that's where a lot of consumers interact and engage with the world. And so when you think about video streaming and audio streaming in particular, we would see in our latest forecast is going to come out in January. It's semi-annual. It's free to members, and if not, we'll drop links cta.tech/research. But either way, forecast for the 5 years, and we do expect growth in the audio and video streaming sectors for a few reasons. One, let's start with video. Cord cutting has been a major phenomenon that continues to this day. How are you capturing those users that want to engage in video content? Well, video streaming services, there are many of them now. We know there's like Hulu, Disney Plus, Paramount, Apple, all of these. And there's different types of ways. There's more passive engagement where you're watching on demand video. And so how do you just go from show A to B to more interactive viewing of like live sports and live TV? That's all converging now as well. Convergence is the name of the game, where if you look at Hulu or even HBO Max, now that's Max, they show live sports now in addition to movies on. So it's how do you create an all-encompassing library that entices and captures listeners? That's something that audio streaming, for example, and why it's grown, has done a really good job. They have a universal content library for the most part on Spotify and Apple that brings people in. So watching that space, this is why you're seeing so much growth. But how do you continue doing that? Because you have things like streaming fatigue being talked about on the video side, how in the audio space, everyone makes the same money per listener. So as my job is, all right, these are clearly the technologies that are winning today, aka the next 6 to 12 months. Well, how do enterprises and companies continue to capture that interest moving forward? For video, it's probably going to be bundling video services. We've heard Netflix and HBO Max are looking to partner together in a way. Apple TV and Paramount might be bundling their options. Those are competitors bundling together because they recognize the need for universality, live sports with multilingual libraries. How do you build that? Audio side, again, you might be the biggest fan in the world of, like heavy metal. I am too. And then you might have someone who's a huge fan of Taylor Swift. How do you, if they listen to Taylor Swift all the time, monetize them more? Like, how do you monetize super fans so that you're actually getting true revenue depth from your high powered listeners? Maybe that's exclusive content, exclusive features, more interactivity, and services tied to your streamers. So that's something that's going to be the next, at least in the entertainment side. How do you bundle in more services, either in entertainment or branch out further to really maximize your ROI per user? That's why ad supported in video is big right now, because there's a higher average revenue per user with ads than there were on the ad free version.
That's hard to believe, but yeah, that's amazing. And probably proofs in the pudding, right? With how many of those ad supported versions you're now seeing.
Yeah. Everyone's moved into it. I mean, Netflix is in it now, right? And they were kind of the disruptor in the model. In some ways, you almost could say cable is dead, long live cable. In terms of how it's really changed, where we're going back to some things that worked in the previous model, but it's still subscription based, because it's from consumer perspective, it's the ability to turn up a subscription on and off on demand based on your need. That extends to the enterprise too, but from this example, it's the consumer that's able to do that.
Yeah. One of the things that we've seen as a company that kind of manages the subscription lifecycle, or at least the technology around it, is you had a lot of those streaming companies who had distributors, right? They had never a direct connection to an end consumer. And then all of a sudden they jumped into the market and were in that. And we saw so many of them have no idea how to operate that way, how to interact with, engage with a consumer, even how to manage a subscription. And now they've gotten the taste of that and they love it, right? But now you're talking about bundling, which is potentially your product with mine. Maybe you own the relationship and mine's bundled in with yours, but now I'm losing that, right? Or at least potentially losing that direct connection with the customer, at least not in the way I had it before. Do you think because of bundling or because of that limitation of bundling, that there might be some apprehension for companies getting together, or at least that's something they're really trying to figure out?
I think that's where strategy is going to be tantamount, right? It's recognizing in some ways when you're bundling together, at least when you think about, I mentioned the Netflix and Max, that's coming together through Verizon and where they're bundling together, right? That is a partner that's related, where it's a connectivity services provider, it's a mobile connection that's complementing and giving, in this case, the distribution network more than anything for the content services. But I think about it in something I've been watching is, well, what's ESPN going to be like in terms of, how they're making money for Disney in this case? Are they looking for maybe a partner that can, that might be craving or needing more sports content to design, and maybe has a different distribution model, has a bit more capital at times too to help support it, because you have to consider those considerations. So someone like Apple, where they have some growth in the subscription side, maybe that's their way to get more sports. So it's a partner to fill that out in the entertainment side. But what makes it, and we call it, like, there's the phrase mega bundling, where, you're combining all these entertainment services, but I like to think more novel bundling. How are you maybe complementing with a service that's not really in your direct field? It started with Hulu and Spotify. You said, a partnership that you could subscribe together, right? And that's audio and movie. But in Latin America, Disney Plus was already testing that when they launched Disney Plus. They paired it with Mercado Libre. If you're not familiar with them, they are the e-commerce, like the Amazon of Latin America. They went with an e-commerce platform as their subscription model, right? And I think this is something that it's not entirely a new concept. If you look at places like Alibaba and Tencent and JD in China, they've done the super app approach where everything all in one go. We might be seeing that with a bit of mega bundling in the States, where it might not be just entertainment to entertainment. It could be, I'm pairing my Apple Fitbit digital health services with my Apple TV that's complemented by a Spotify subscription that I can play on my Apple TV device, the hardware, on my Apple TV Plus software services. And then I have Spotify on my watch. So it's one of those, how can you maybe complement each other? So instead of being about how do we manage competition, it might be more, how do we complement with services that people don't necessarily expect?
Yeah. Interesting. In a lot of these situations, though, it seems like the one who has the most control, at least, is the one who got that customer first and maybe bundled in the other products. Do you think that will continue to be important, or maybe not, because these guys used to be used to a model where they were kind of one jump away from the end consumer, or maybe multiple?
Yeah, I think it's, in a lot of ways, I think there's always going to be a desire from customers. We live in such a greater interconnected world that's so on demand with the consumer. I don't think any company ever wants to feel like they're losing a touch point. And I think in some ways, maybe it's not the full management of the relationship, but at least having maybe and based on the agreements of the use of services, being able to use some of that data to figure out exactly, and sharing that co-ops of, well, how do we understand our consumer? Because I think it's which level do you want in terms of your consumer and customer engagement? It's, do you want to have the day-to-day customer relationship management, or all do you need to have is the strategy of knowing what your customer wants and being able to proactively and analytically respond to it? And I think that's going to be a calculus that any subscription company, whether they're going to the consumer itself, B2C, or their customers in B2B space, they're going to have to consider that on a level. Because think about that if you want to go enterprise, cybersecurity, right? You think about, especially the acquisition lifecycle right now in the cyberspace. You had Mandiant, a major cybersecurity company, get bought by Google. Google's incorporated their services perfectly into their cloud in a lot of ways to have a cybersecurity feature. There's going to be a lot more partnerships if you're not going to get outright acquired in that space. So as a result, it's going to be, well, what layers do you bring and how can you share that data effectively and safely to make sure that everyone is meeting what the customer needs?
Yeah, makes sense. Let's look at it from the other side, from the consumer perspective. Where do you see consumer sentiment going? Because I think when everybody talked about cord cutting, one of the things they loved was getting away from giant packages of a whole bunch of stuff that they didn't pay for in lieu of something I was actually using, or at least close enough to using to justify the cost. And now we're going right back towards these bigger, more expensive bundles that are inevitably going to have things that consumers don't want. Do you think the old subscription method of fixed amount every month for access to unlimited usage will continue to win? Or do you see some hybrid of maybe lower plans